I always explain to my clients, I'm like, listen, it bodes well for me that your dog is listening so well to me, but I'm brand new. They're meeting me for the first time. So
And you're
right off
setting
the
the
get-go,
tone.
I set the tone like, that doesn't work. And this is how we're going to do things. And then when the client tries to do that, the dog looks at them like, what are you talking about? You're not that guy. What's up, beautiful people? Welcome back to another episode of the Pack Leader Mentality Podcast. Thank you guys for your patience. We've been kind of MIA for a couple of weeks, but we recently went to New York to visit family. I welcomed my new baby nephew to the world.
He's
And
adorable.
yeah, and so we just, we had some family time. I was intending on trying to record the podcast. I brought some mics with us, but we never ended up getting around to it. But I mean, honestly, there were certain moments where I wanted to, and then I just looked around at my family and I was like, all right, well, I'm not just going to, leave them.
Disappear
And
for an hour or
yeah,
two.
exactly. And so, yeah, I think I made the right decision, though. We got to take those moments in when we can. So, but anyway, without further ado, we're back. And today I want to talk about what rules and boundaries are and why they're necessary. I think that, well, at least in my experience, I can say that I've created posts on social media and I'll have some random trainer or wannabe trainer in my comments saying things like, oh, dogs don't need rules and boundaries, or just some weird comment implying that. And it kind of cracks me up. Like, I think it's really funny, but I am curious as to the reason why they think that.
I don't understand that because if you look at dogs, right? If you have puppies with their mom,
Mm-hmm.
the mother will set boundaries for her
Yeah.
puppies.
Yep.
So I don't understand how we go from that, which is happening naturally in
Yeah.
nature, in the way that they communicate with one another. And then some people don't agree with it and actually decide to pull that out of the equation. It's like,
Yeah.
that to me, that doesn't make sense.
I mean, I agree with you, but I want to talk about that today. I also want to get into exactly what are rules and boundaries, right? So we need to clarify the definition of that and how, so that we're all on the same page. I also want to talk about why some trainers don't recommend them and why some trainers can be too strict, in my opinion. So let's jump into what I would define as rules and boundaries. I would say that rules tell us what dogs can and can't do, and they can be applied in certain circumstances and in certain conditions, and also encompass boundaries, right? So within rules are the boundaries. So they're separate, but I would consider rules as like the umbrella term. For a boundary, I would say that could be like a definitive area or where a dog is like not allowed beyond a certain threshold, for example. So like, and again, going into using rules and boundaries together, I would say a rule could be that a dog isn't allowed on a furniture under any circumstances, or we can say that the dog is allowed on the furniture, but only in a certain location. So like on the little blanket that you have on the couch, for example. So that would be the boundary. So the rule is the dog can come up on the couch with permission. That's the rule, only with permission. And within that rule, the boundary is the dog can only be on the couch on the little blanket. That's it. So just to kind of give you guys some perspective on how those two kind of coincide with each other. So another example of a boundary and a rule together would be like using play. I'll give you an example using play. So we can say that no rough play is allowed between our dogs. And the boundary is that at a certain point when that play starts to get a little too rough, that's where we cut off play, right? Or redirect the dogs and allow them to come back together and play until they reach that threshold of intensity, and then we separate them and then start over. So to give you another example of rules and boundaries together as one. And So now that we've got rules and boundaries out of the way, let's talk a little bit about the difference and potential reasons why some trainers disagree on the use and application of rules and boundaries. In my experience, a lot of force-free or purely positive trainers speak negatively whenever I've made videos about rules and boundaries, as I said before. And there's always this like scoffing and implication that dogs can make progress with behavioral issues and obedience problems without the use of rules and boundaries. Personally, I can't think of any situation that this would make any sense at all, but I guess this is where I would say an open invitation to any force-free trainer out there. If you'd like to elaborate on that or explain to me how this is the case, I would really like to understand why or how that's possible, because, I think in any natural setting with any social group of beings or animals, there's always going to be some degree of rules and boundaries in order for everyone to coexist together, right? And peacefully and in a balanced, harmonious way. However, whatever fancy words you want to throw out there, right? But just peacefully and everybody getting along.
Yeah. I mean, dogs, again, going back to like dogs, even as adults, set boundaries. Our dogs are setting boundaries with Charlie, the puppy, where when she's a little too much in their face, they make it known, whether that is, raising their lip a little bit or Minnie just kind of barking at her.
Yeah, or a little growl.
Yeah. That's a boundary.
Absolutely. So even in our lives, like we have rules and boundaries. And in my opinion, in order to have dogs live with us in the most peaceful way, we need to introduce to them rules and boundaries that are appropriate for them living with us. And I think that across the board, that can vary between households. And I see that a lot. Some people have certain rules and boundaries with their dogs and others don't. I think that same with me as a professional trainer. I'm sure if you go to another trainer's house, you might see that they live a little bit differently or a lot differently than I do, for example. And that's perfectly normal. The whole point here is to be able to apply rules and boundaries in a way that is beneficial to your relationship and is like mutually beneficial to both you and the dog, for example. A little bit more you than the dog, to be honest, but I think it's all circumstantial.
So let me ask you this. I'm actually curious for my own sake. In your experience, in the homes that you go into where, there's a home maybe that has moderate boundaries, or let's stick with moderate because I think intense can go into a whole different ball game, but moderate, healthy boundaries to a home that has zero boundaries. In your experience, do you feel like the dogs that have zero boundaries from their owners are the ones that are like really crazy, have all these type of issues, or has that not really played a role in their personality?
It definitely plays a role. Like it's usually with 100% accuracy, I can hear problems that a person is dealing with their dog, and I can say exactly what the dog is allowed to get away with on a fairly regular basis, because they're all problems that produce the same sort of symptoms and issues,
kind of like children.
Yeah, exactly. If you're not asking kids to be polite and sort of this learn to earn relationship, like, yes, you can hang out with your friends, but first you need to, do your homework, or yes, you can play your game, but first you need to clean your room. Without that, it's just a free for all for the kids. And it almost creates this entitlement. And dogs, in my experience, you get the same results with dogs, like 10 out of 10 times. It's pretty common. I will, let me rephrase it. I'll say 9 out of 10 times, because I think there are always exceptions. And I've certainly met dogs that, people will say, I didn't do anything with this dog. I didn't have to train them. I never did anything. They were just great. And those dogs do exist. But the reality is that they're very few and far between. And those dogs actually create more problems for people in the future, because
people get a second, their dog, and it's not
the same at all. It's a complete nightmare because they are just a different dog. So that's really important to understand. But with regard to trainers, there's a whole other aspect to this, like the other side of the spectrum, as I like to say. And, there are trainers that I would say are a bit overkill with rules and boundaries, and their perspective on the relationship differs greatly. They think that dog shouldn't make a move without their permission, and it's very, very, everything they do is very regulated and very strict. It almost seems like, I would say, people would call the dogs that live that way like robot dogs. I would say that the dogs are withdrawn and kind of cold, and they're doing things out of programming and not really allowed to think for themselves, make decisions on their own, and it's
terrible.
I'm not a fan of that, to be honest. And I, again, with everything, when it comes to dogs, I find myself really in the middle, or trying to be in the middle as much as possible, and just treating every dog and situation as a unique and individual circumstance that needs to be addressed apart from everything else,
So what is the best approach and solution when it comes to applying boundaries?
I would say this is what I tell all my clients. How strict you are with your dog should be in direct correlation with how out of control they are, and where you currently are in your relationship with them, and like how well they listen to you, for example. So if I go into someone's home and their dog is just jumping all over the couch, jumping all over furniture, zero rules and boundaries, they're barking to get attention, they're very pushy, they don't listen to the owner at all, then my recommendation with regard to rules and boundaries and being strict, it's going to be a complete 180 from the way that they're currently living. So from an outsider, it's going to be very, very strict. Or even for that person, some of the things that I'll tell them that they need to stop doing and start implementing, it's going to seem like, wow, that's a lot,
Yeah.
like ignore your dog, until certain times. Don't let them on the furniture. If they get up on the couch, tell them off and make sure they get off. It's going to feel very, very different and foreign to them, and it's going to feel, they might even feel like they're being mean to their dog. But that again is in direct correlation to how out of control their dog is. If I go into someone's house and their dog listens well, they're not jumping all over everything, and they just need to fine tune a couple of issues. Let's say like the dog doesn't come when called, or maybe the dog jumps a little bit and they want to clean that up. But generally speaking, the dog listens well, they're not out of control, they're not running amok in the house. Then my suggestion to them is not going to be the same as walking into that other person's house whose dog was just completely out of control and just no respect for space and things like that. So very, very different. And that's what's really important for everybody to understand, that when you apply rules and boundaries, usually the way that I like to explain it is we're trying to create habits, a certain foundation or like a lifestyle for the dog to learn to adhere to. This is the way we do things in this house, right?
Yeah.
And when your dog is completely out of control, the best thing for you to do is to attack it from like all these different areas. So for example, I would tell people to make the dog sit at the door before you let them out to the bathroom. Make them sit and wait before you release them to eat their dinner. Make them sit and wait to get affection. Only give them affection if they're on their bed. Don't let them on the couch. Don't sleep with them. Kennel train them, teach them place. Don't let people greet them until they've been calm, right? And again, it just seems like, oh my gosh, my lifestyle is completely changing, and yeah, temporarily. And that's
sometimes it's like harder for the owner than actually
for
the
sure.
dog.
It's 99% of the time it's harder for the owner, because the dog eventually, even though there might be some resistance at first and they may not be necessarily happy, they conform a lot faster than people do, because
They need that guidance and direction.
Yeah. So again, these rules and boundaries don't have to last the entire lifetime of the dog. In certain situations, they do though. For example, I'll use Logan, our dog. He is a resource guarder, and we've worked on those issues, but it's to me, resource guarding is like a part of the personality, and it can be like a plague, and where it leaches out into other areas. And anyone who's worked with dogs and resource guarding knows this. But with Logan, for example, I remember one time he jumped on the bed in the spare bedroom, and I have a picture of it because right on the bed we had a pillow. It says, "Be kind to animals or I'll kill you," and he was just laying there so peacefully, and it was kind of a cute moment, right? But it was my mistake to let him do that. I saw him on the bed. I didn't see him get on the bed. I saw him on the bed, and he saw me see him.
And be okay with it.
And I did nothing about it.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I took a picture and I was like, oh, look how cute it is. I think I even posted it. for the next 2 weeks, this mother was on the bed. And I was like, bro, get off. What are you doing? And I was annoyed, but at the same time, I would say like 30% at him, but also 70% at me because I let it happen. Yeah. But this is an example, and he wasn't resource guarding the bed, just to be clear. But my point is that he's a dog that will never have those privileges because
you give him like a centimeter and he takes a mile.
Yeah, it's not for him. And this is another thing that I like for my clients to understand. Be prepared for that. It really just depends on your dog. If they conform well, if they do well, if these rules and boundaries start to become, I would say, second nature for them, then you can ease up a little bit, and you can just kind of reapply them as needed to, get yourself back on track. Brooklyn is a good example. Our shepherd, she's just really good. So,
but you really like laid in those. In obviously like in a balanced way, like from the moment she came into our home as a puppy, there was rules and boundaries for her.
Yes. Yep.
And so you really did build a great foundation for her because you started from, like I said,
from the get-go.
From the get-go, and you were consistent with it.
Yeah.
And so now it's like there are no really rules and boundaries to set for her because she knows and she navigates within those boundaries on her own. Exactly. She might need a reminder sometimes when you're like, Brooklyn Place. Well, when I tell her Brooklyn Place, not you, me.
For sure.
But, then just following through with that, she's like, all right, fine, I'll do it. But I think, sorry, I'm just totally taking over this conversation, but she's such a great example that if you just put in the work and build that strong foundation, you're most of the time, like obviously it's not a guarantee, but you're set. You might have to remind your dog here and there, but you're good.
Yeah. Another good example that just came to mind as you were saying that is when I have clients with dogs who are very codependent of them and follow them everywhere. One of the rules that I say to them to implement is don't let your dog follow you around. And to clarify to them and to you guys, that's specifically to address the codependency. It's not bad for your dog to follow you around. Whenever I come into the office, Logan comes in this office every time. He follows me all the time into the office.
But if like every move you make, your dog is following you.
Yeah. And if your dog has a propensity to be codependent, or that's who they are, they've been codependent for whatever reason, lack of socialization, you work from home, they're always around you, etc. You'd want to start implementing the rule of you can't follow me around the house. Right. And maybe use a place bed as a boundary or doorways and thresholds around the house as a boundary. If you go to another room, your dog is not allowed to exit the one room that they're in. But again, this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do that forever. I would say once you start to see that your dog becomes less anxious, more comfortable, less dependent on you and your presence, then it's okay for them to follow you around here and there because they're doing well. And if you notice that because your dog starts to follow you around, these behaviors that you were dealing with in the past start to resurface, then I would say you might want to consider the possibility that you should not let this particular dog follow you around under normal circumstances, unless you want them.
It's okay. There's some dogs, like for example, Logan, that it is what it is. You have to be consistent with those boundaries. And there's other dogs like Brooklyn, and I'm sure many others, that once you set those in place, they get it and they're good.
Yeah. And again, like I've implemented pretty much all this stuff with my own dogs. I don't use really any of it anymore. If my dogs want to come up to me to get affection, I give them affection. But again, it's because of the ability that I have to communicate with them in any moment. Let's say if I'm petting Brooklyn and Logan comes up because he wants affection, which normally he would, I don't have a problem with that. I wouldn't allow or I wouldn't recommend that for a client who has a dog who is pushy and always demanding attention. I would say to them, when that dog comes up to you when you're petting another dog, make them go away every time until they give up on that idea. And then potentially in the future, once in a while, you can have them come in and then it's okay. But again, if we're talking about eliminating this pushy behavior, we cannot allow it. Mm-hmm. And again, another example of how there's compromise, right? So it can be circumstantial that you apply rules and boundaries. And then also when the dog is doing well, you can potentially give them these privileges back because they're well behaved all around. And, using Brooklyn and Logan again as an example, Logan is allowed to come up at any time, though. If Logan comes up to me while I'm petting Brooklyn or vice versa, and I say, Logan, go away, or go place, or Brooklyn, go away, no, go place, they'll stop and they'll turn around and they'll go away. And occasionally I'll even implement that just to make sure that I still have that communication with them. And if I didn't, then for maybe the next week or two, I'm going to send them away just to make sure that they understand that, hey, listen, this is still, that I'm still the one who is determining whether or not you get attention, and it's just a matter of keeping that line of communication open so that we can use it when needed. Another example of that in our house is like letting the dogs out to go to the bathroom. Again, I used to have them do that frequently, all the time. Open the door, free, go ahead. And I hardly ever do that. However, once in a while, I'll tell them sit and I'll open the door and they kind of look at me like, can I go?
Well,
and then I tell them free.
It's also helped because now we don't have dogs that bum rush.
Exactly.
And like they're not fighting for the entryway or doorway, and they're not bum rushing and like hitting the glass. They're calm and cool about it.
Yes. And again, so we're just creating that foundation of calmness and some boundaries, and then they become automatic. So it's not like I have to make them sit every single time. They're already calmer and more relaxed when they exit the door or enter a door, for example.
I think there's like this misconception, I guess you can say, because sometimes, in talking to people and seeing them work with their dogs, often people, I think it's a black and white type of thing, and there's a lot of gray area, and there's a lot of fluidity that goes with it. Just roll with it, test your dog, see how they're doing. Like you said, it's not like this forever or like that forever. It seems like it's always this like balancing act, this fluid act of like going back and forth, seeing where your dog is at, meeting them there or reminding them or not. Like it's not and sometimes too, like if somebody's been training their dog for a while and they got it, and then the one time they make a mistake, it's this like big deal, and it's like it's okay for them to make a mistake. It happens. We make mistakes, so
100%. Well, it's funny because I actually had a client recently that I was working with, and they mentioned to me that they noticed that when their dog came up to me and like leaned into me, that I would reach down and pet him a little bit. And they said, I thought that was not a good thing. The trainers that we worked with before said that we always had to make them sit in order to get affection. And I said, listen, I'm not saying that they were wrong, because I don't know where exactly you were in your training and relationship with the dog. But from what I can tell, your obedience or his obedience with you, him listening to you, he's very well behaved. You have a good relationship with him. He's responsive to you. So it's okay if he comes up to you and he leans into you for you to pet him and love on him. Yeah. And this is an example for me where I think it's a little overkill with some trainers, where it's like you said, it's very black and white and it's always this and never that. And to me, that's kind of extreme, and it can really turn people off. And then on the other end of that, you've got, oh, your dog doesn't need rules and boundaries. And that honestly is a really easy way out for people. Like it's very easy to just go, yeah, whatever, man, they're fine. But then you have an absolute nightmare of a dog 3 months later, 6 months later, 2 years later, where you're just like, okay, I don't know what to do. I'm at a complete loss. And then somebody like me comes in, and then it's like everything has to change. And it seems like it's a bit much, but it's not, just because you're really so far behind the ball,
Yeah, you're completely on the other side of that spectrum. Let me ask you this though. So is there ever a time where it's too late for a dog that has zero boundaries, or for someone who hasn't really implemented them? Can you start at any time? Is there like an age range of like dogs where it's like, okay, well,
Yeah. No, I would say not for me. No, for me, no, there's never too late, and there's no like age maximum where I would say, okay, the dog's too old. With exception, I'll take that back. I would say the only point to that would be, the only situation where I would say, yes, the dog is too old is if they're, like
Health,
on their
mobility.
yeah, exactly. Like on their last leg, like, all right, just let the dog be, let him live out his last couple of months in peace.
Yeah.
No sense in being strict for no reason. Like let the dog live a good life. Or let him have a like peaceful life. There's no sense in trying to implement some new stuff for the remaining few weeks of his life. But that would be the only exception. Generally, I would say that there's no such thing as a dog that's too old or it being too late for you to start to implement rules and boundaries at all.
I would just add to that, and I'm probably beating you to it, but being consistent, so that especially when you're just starting out and you are showing your dog what's accepted, what's not anymore, is being consistent with that, because that's very confusing for them if they're always allowed to jump on the counter and now you're not allowing them, but occasionally they do it and you're like, oh, that's cute.
Yeah. I think you meant couch.
On the counter?
Oh, you said counter.
I said counter.
You said, oh, you meant
Did I
counter.
say counter? Yeah, because there's some dogs that like jump on the counter and people think it's cute. Like, oh, it's so cute.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's true.
But they don't want it because there's times where they do it and there's a nice piece of steak that
for sure.
like they're taking off the counter.
Well, the other thing to keep
counter,
in mind
couch, whatever.
All right, I was just making sure. But yeah, because in my mind, I'm like, wow, people allow that. But I guess, yeah, people have. Or at least I've seen dogs jump on the counter and I'm looking at them and they're just kind of like, yeah. And I'm like, okay. But I would say, too, keep in mind that when you start implementing rules and boundaries, you might have a dog that offers a lot of resistance. And that's
like,
normal. And, I look at it like having a kid or being a kid who was allowed to get away with a ton of stuff. And then all of a sudden, mom and dad decide,
give me your phone.
We're not going to tolerate this anymore. Things are going to change in the kid naturally. I know I would. I'd be like, I hate life. I hate you. I hate everything.
I'm running away.
This sucks. Yeah, I'm depressed. I don't want any of this stuff. I want new parents. And it's fine. We'll get over it as humans, and the dogs will get over it as well. And the other thing to keep in mind, too, is that your dog knows you very well. And what I mean by that is if I came into your house and I started to work with your dog and implement, like rules and boundaries of going to place and not coming off the bed until I say free, or sit stay or down stay, or some sort of obedience, and then you take the leash and you try to work with your dog and they don't listen to you the same way that they listen to me, there's a reason for that. And the reason, apart from the fact that obviously I do this for a living, but the reason is because they know who you are. They know that 9 times out of 10, 10 times out of 10, they don't really have to listen to you. You've never really made them listen to you. You've never really enforced the rules. So there will also be resistance in that regard, that your dog's going to look at you and go, what? Get out of here. Yeah. Stop playing. I'm going to do it.
Next day, they're like, yeah, no, you can't be serious. Exactly. We're doing this again.
And I hear this all the time. People are always so amazed. And, not to share the secrets, guys, but I always explain to my clients, I'm like, listen, it bodes well for me that your dog is listening so well to me, but I'm brand new. They're meeting me for the first time. So right off the get-go, I set the tone like, that doesn't work. And this is how we're going to do things. And then when the client tries to do that, the dog looks at them like, what are you talking about? You're not that guy, So it's easy a lot of times when a trainer comes into somebody's house and grabs the leash and the dog does everything they want. Of course, there's handling and things like that go into account. We don't want to take that away from any trainer, and even myself. Obviously I know what I'm doing with the leash. But
yeah, of course. Like if you're not handling it correctly, then the dog's not going to listen to you either.
But there's more to that. There's a psychological component to that, where the dog is learning who I am for the first time and seeing that this is how this guy operates, and they know the owner and they know how they operate. I always give the example of like having a teacher who is kind of a pushover in your class, and all the kids know it and everybody just does what they want. And then all of a sudden you have a substitute teacher come in, and right from the get-go, they're like, they're not playing and they're just dead serious. They're not joking around. They're not necessarily mean, right? Because they're giving the rewards at the right time. They're encouraging the kids, but they're also they demand respect, let's say. And they have that substitute for 2 weeks. What happens when the new teacher comes, or the regular teacher comes back?
Back to chaos.
Back to chaos.
Or vice versa, really. Like I remember, I've had some strict teachers, but when the substitute came in, it's this like known thing, right? The substitute doesn't care.
You can do whatever you want.
And it was just
Yeah.
kids doing whatever they want.
I actually had a substitute though that was more strict
Really?
than the
I've
teacher.
never had that. I've always had, for the most part, really strict teachers. So like it was vacation for all the students.
Yeah.
If we had a substitute.
That is usually the perception.
Yeah. You're the 9 out of 10.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, just I hope that this clarifies for you guys. And I'm sure a lot of you listening already understand that there are obvious benefits to having rules and boundaries with your dogs. But I really want to just clarify on how you should be applying them and, what that looks like for you guys, because there's obviously a lot of confusion out there. There's the black and white trainers where everything is always this, never that, etc. And then you have the willy-nilly trainers that are like, it's okay, let dogs be dogs. And I think we need to meet somewhere in the middle. Certain dogs shouldn't have certain privileges based on who they are as an individual and the way that they perceive the world and the relationship. And there are other dogs who we can start to compromise. Like one example that I love to offer my clients when it comes to compromise, especially my clients who love to have their dogs on the couch. I say this, first of all, if we teach the dog place, please don't have your dog on the couch. Let's bring value to the dog being on the bed. Let's make that more fun and rewarding for them. And then later on, we can start to add the privileges back to the couch. But I'll normally say, like, here's the compromise. How about we only allow your dog on the couch Monday, Wednesday, Friday for like 1 hour, and that's a start to begin to implement some, privileges back into the mix, but start off small. Don't just give them everything back right away. And this is a way that you can implement that with anything when it comes to some rules and boundaries. Start to give a little bit here and there. And if you start to see that your dog is faltering and they're kind of turning back to their old ways, then take those privileges back again. There's nothing wrong with that, and it's okay. But you need to make that decision for the benefit of your own relationship and your own sanity for that matter, Because what's the point in putting in a bunch of work only to let it all go to hell, shortly after? But yeah, I hope this episode helps. I was really excited about talking about this because it's been on my mind for a while. As always, please send us your questions. Email us. I think email is better. I'm going to say forget about Instagram. Just email us.
Yeah, because oftentimes it goes into the hidden messages. And so if you're not actively looking for it, you'll never find it.
But not just that, but like I love some of the questions that we've got recently where people are elaborating. And that's another thing that I wanted to say. If you have a question and you send it to us, please give me as much information about your situation as possible.
Yeah.
Because I know in the past we get questions like, how do I get my dog to stop barking? Well, I mean, it's such a broad question and there's so many possible solutions to that. So whenever you guys have a question, if you would please go into some detail, it would allow me to really just break things down based on all the information that you give me and really be able to give not just you, the person who submitted the question, but others that may be dealing with similar scenarios, some really good insight on how to deal with it. Because I want to help you. I don't want to just answer such generic questions. I want to be able to get into detail. So the more detail you give me, the better I'll be able to reciprocate that and give it back to you. So just a little tip for you guys when you submit your questions. But yeah, we love the questions, and I think that's it for us today, right?
I think so.
All right, we'll see you guys for the next one. Peace.